Hi, I'm Christy McDonald, and here's what's coming up on One Detroit. The history of militias and radical roots in Michigan, plus Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson on the power of words and political rhetoric. Also ahead, election 2020, the changing demographics in Wayne County and how that could affect the vote. Then we check in on how school is going for students from the PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs. It's all coming up right now on One Detroit.
From Delta Faucets to Behr Paint, MASCO Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. MASCO, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Support for this program provided by the Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
The KRESGE Foundation, Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan.
The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.
Business Leaders for Michigan, dedicated to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. NISSAN Foundation, Ally, and viewers like you.
Hi there and welcome to One Detroit. I'm Christy McDonald. Glad to have you with me this week. Following the rapidly changing news each day can feel overwhelming. From the alleged plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer, to COVID cases around the country on the rise, to the increasingly intense political ads and campaigning, on One Detroit, we try to bring it all into context and let you take a breath. Coming up on the show, Nolan Finley from the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson from American Black Journal meet up to talk about the power of words and extremist threats against the governor. Javed Ali joins them. He's the former senior director for counterterrorism at the National Security Council. He's now at the Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan. Plus, Dr. Amy Cooter from Vanderbilt on the history of militias in Michigan and across the country. Then a closer look at the demographic shifts in Wayne County and what that could mean for the election. And then I meet up with some of the high school students from the PBS NewsHour's Student Reporting Labs. They talk about the challenges of school at home. Plus, opera in a garage. The Michigan Opera Theater's inventive performance starting this weekend. It is all coming up. But we are starting off with a closer look at the history of militias in the country and focusing on fringe groups in Michigan, since news of the plot against Governor Gretchen Whitmer continues to unfold. One Detroit associate producer Will Glover spoke with Dr. Amy Cooter at Vanderbilt University, who studies domestic militias and their motives.
What constitutes a militia? What is it? What is the initial purpose behind having militias?
Militias are often looped in with a lot of other groups that are kind of similar to them, but if we're getting into academic nitty-gritty details, are actually different. The core principle behind militia groups is that from their perspective, they're doing a civic duty. They're trying to stand up for a literal interpretation of the Constitution. Many of them see this as a way to continue prior military service. And for all of them, the Second Amendment is hugely important. It's very central to who they are and why they do what they do.
What are the demographics of the average militia group in here, in the Midwest, in places like Michigan?
Right. So most militia groups are predominantly white, predominantly male. Tends to be the case that they have no more than about 10% women. Usually no more than a handful of non-white members. Most of them are working class, lower middle class. There are exceptions. And for the most part, they really have just this core commonality about this need to protect themselves and their community. In short, I found that the vast majority of militia groups don't have race and racism as part of their group structure. That on average, the racism we see in those folks is about the same as we would expect in any other group of the same demographic. Many of those groups actively try to discourage racists from joining. Not that they always do a perfect job, but I think that's kind of surprising, and it's helpful to know that in terms of separating out which groups are likely to be a problem versus not. because the more extreme groups, about 10% in my estimation, actually do tend to include things like racism, sexism as more of an overt part of their picture. And in my opinion, and some other folks' opinion, that tends to be a good marker of which groups we probably need to monitor a bit more closely for possible violence.
With the election of President Trump and this new administration, has there been a rise in militia activity, the amount of people who are participating in militias?
We think so. Again, those exact numbers are really difficult to track over time, but all indications seem to point to yes, that with Trump in particular, he tends to appeal to a lot of the underlying fears that these folks have, not just in militias, but in other groups, other swaths in that political spectrum, where the way he talks about immigration, the way he talks about Muslims kind of sends signals that, oh, these are things we should be concerned about, and other people in the government aren't handling this well, so maybe we should do something about it. Additionally, in recent months, we've seen some very clear signals from Trump about going potentially armed and standing up for yourself and guarding against violent protesters, right? In a way that does encourage some of these folks to do those very things.
Are you concerned about the recent things that have happened with the plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer? Are you concerned about that motivating other militias around the country to take similar action?
I'm concerned, quite frankly, that things like that are already in progress. I would not be surprised, obviously, if law enforcement is already monitoring groups across the board for signs of this. But I do think that there is a possibility that some of those extreme elements within the militia movement could be further radicalized by this, that the folks who are already sort of the extreme fringe are looking at this and saying, oh, it's just entrapment, or oh, it's fake altogether. And some of them are linking it to the idea that this is just an attempt to control people who are fighting for free speech, fighting to uphold their rights. And some of them are also connecting it to the upcoming election, saying that it's an attempt to quell Trump supporters specifically. So that too could feed into some of the escalating possible violence we see going into that event as well.
Our One Detroit contributors Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of American Black Journal got together along with former National Security Council advisor on counterterrorism, Javed Ali. He is now at the Ford School for Public Policy at the University of Michigan, and they talk about the power of words and the threat of domestic terrorism.
What we saw last week here in Michigan with the plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer, I think, is everyone's worst nightmare when they think of extremist reactions to political figures or political discourse. But talk about the connection between that kind of behavior and the language that we see unfolding pretty frequently now in political discourse.
I wrote an opinion piece in the Detroit News that talked about three key factors that I think are fueling this broader phenomena that's happening throughout the country, and the Watchmen plot is just a manifestation of that. The three key factors that I talked about were the impact of the pandemics, the protests, and the aftermath of the George Floyd death and Breonna Taylor, and then thirdly, the whole state of political discourse in the country. And when it comes to the political discourse part of it, yeah, this is really tough to sort of empirically prove, but there are researchers who think that according to their analysis, that there is a little bit more of a direct correlation between very hard-edged political rhetoric and language and how that motivates individuals towards violent extremism.
The First Amendment provides a pretty effective shield for these folks to foment their the growth of extremism.
This is one of the big challenges for the United States, tackling this issue of domestic terrorism. We have very strong constitutional protections on what is considered free speech, to include the most extreme and radical ideas, at least to all of us here on this screen, but to the individuals who share those beliefs, as long as they don't try to take criminal action, they're perfectly legitimate. So over the course of the last several years, we've seen more and more of that kind of sort of propaganda and discourse and beliefs, both on the international terrorism side and the domestic terrorism side, sort of percolating in social media and in other kind of closed environments. Now, there are other countries overseas that have very different laws with respect to hate speech, and you can get prosecuted for terrorism-related charges for doing things that in this country are completely legal.
We also have freedom of association in this country, and we saw footage of, for instance, the Senate Majority Leader on stage earlier with some of the people who were involved in this plot. When some of these folks were out at the Capitol marching around with guns. Talk about the connection between political leadership and the cover it might be giving in some cases to this kind of reaction.
Yeah, that's another sort of issue that we have to sort of unpack here inside the United States with that freedom of association combined with the freedom of speech and the right to bear arms in public spaces. These are all things that make it very difficult for law enforcement to know when to intervene. It seemed fairly disturbing to see these, not the protest aspect of it, but the fact that there were so many people showing up armed to these events. And then some of those people who were armed actually got access into the state capitol. You can't bring firearms into most federal buildings, even if you're a sworn law enforcement officer. And if you are going to do that, you have to go through a whole series of checks. So there seemed to be something very different happening here in Michigan or with the state capitol that allowed that to happen then. And again, the perceptions it created about whether that's legitimate or not, and then perhaps the sort of the fear that created as well.
So Javed, how do we get ahead of this and how do we counter this without trampling rights?
We don't have the right policy framework or paradigm to confront what I believe is now a growing threat of domestic terrorism. And I think there's a lot of things we could be doing on that front, whether from the legal side, the federal level, the state and local level, things that we could be happening with the private sector. And then even local communities. This is the 25th anniversary of the Oklahoma City attack, which prior to 9/11 was the single biggest act of terrorism in the United States. We shouldn't wait for another Oklahoma City type event. We should start doing the groundwork now. And I'm just not sure what it's going to take to bring people together to have those conversations. Hopefully it's not a tragedy.
All right, our thanks to Stephen and Nolan. We'll see you guys soon. Okay, we are weeks away from the election, and this year we've been taking a look at the changing demographics across Southeast Michigan and how that might impact election results. From Macomb County, which is often called the bellwether for the country, to Oakland County, where college-educated women have led a blue wave. Now we're looking at Wayne County.
Historically, Democrats can count on Wayne County to vote for their candidates in presidential elections. Still, its voters can have a crucial role in the outcomes. Before we get into the politics of the county, let's look at the demographics. We looked at data from the census and checked in with demographer Kurt Metzger. At the core is a drastic drop in people. Countywide, almost 600,000 people have left since 1980. Out-migration, mostly to Macomb and Oakland County, has been the trend for decades. It's also much younger than the neighboring counties.
Its median age is 37, almost 3 years less than either Macomb or Oakland. Big deal. People may not be too excited about median ages, but you'll find that they have more kids under 5, a higher share of their total population tends to be that under 18. Wayne County has that combination of single-parent families, large percentage of single-parent families, coupled with immigrant groups that tend to have higher birth rates.
Only 25% of the population has a college degree, and the median income is $46,000, about $10,000 below the state average. While the region continues to get more multicultural, Wayne County stands out as more diverse than Oakland and Macomb.
It's the only county in the state where the white non-Hispanic population is not in the majority. It's actually just less than 50% white.
Metzger gives a good snapshot of the differences in diversity as you move from one end of the county to the other.
Well, you've got the Grosse Pointes on one side, which is very higher income, high education, tends to be majority white, with the Grosse Pointe Farms is not so much. Then you come to Detroit, which is still 80% African American, but you also have then still that large Latino community that's concentrated in Southwest, feeling somewhat threatened by gentrification. And you've got Highland Park, which is very poor, very African American, and then you get to Hamtramck, which is this mixture of Bangladeshi, Yemeni, African American. Then you move to Dearborn, and you have Dearborn Heights. You have a large Middle Eastern population, Lebanese, Syrian, Iraqi, but primarily Muslim, not the Christian that tend to be in Oakland and Macomb. Allen Park down to Brownstown, Flat Rock. Again, it tends to be more of a lower income, lower education, white, primarily white population. Livonia and Westland are kind of areas that tend to be whiter. Major growth areas in Wayne County have been Plymouth, Northville, Canton Township, and that, Sumter and Brownstown, all those outlying communities.
So that's a look at the county as a whole, but Detroit makes up a large part of it. Let's dive deeper into population changes in the city. It has shrunk by 40,000 people since 2010 alone.
In the last decade, all of a sudden, African Americans said, it's time for us to go too. That now you had openings in the suburbs, both because housing was available, but also because of things have changed and we don't have housing covenants, and people could, if you have the wherewithal, you can move into communities.
Despite the overall drop in population, we've seen a new kind of growth in pockets of the city. The good news is the exodus may be slowing down.
I think the population is starting to stabilize many of the neighborhoods with the movement of Quicken downtown and the redevelopment of the downtown area. You've started to see more young people moving in. There's a lot of demand for housing in Detroit. It's developing up toward New Center, it's developing out toward Corktown, but it is more so a white population moving in. Again, that tends to be every city that has come back over time has seen itself become whiter.
So overall in Wayne County, we see a smaller, younger, and more diverse county than in decades past. Those add up to a voting population that still leans majority Democratic. In 2016, Hillary Clinton got 66% of the vote, and in 2018, 70% voted for Gretchen Whitmer. Pollster Edsel explains how Democrats keep gaining momentum.
So Wayne County is still a Democratic base. Republicans are finding a harder time to count on Western Wayne County as where for their vote because it's much more modest income.
The countywide melting pot has started to change some suburbs.
People don't realize that. We've been multicultural for a long time. And so that shift now is impacting these other suburban cities. Canton is still Republican leaning, but that's changing. Livonia is changing because of who's moving into those population areas.
Whether Wayne County plays a key role in the 2020 presidential election will likely depend on one thing: turnout.
It comes down to Detroit, and it comes down to some of the communities around Detroit. Can you get people to the polls? And if Detroit comes out strong, that's going to make a big difference statewide as well. So it's a matter of, can you get Detroiters to believe that their vote makes a difference?
For all of our election 2020 reports on each county, just head to our website, onedetroitpbs.org. All right, it's mid-October. Parents and kids are still navigating school, whether it's at home or my kids are actually starting an optional hybrid system, half in-seat, half at home this month. Well, we wanted to check in with our students here in Michigan who are part of the PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Labs to see how they're doing. I met up with Isaac, who's a sophomore from Cass Tech, Mackenzie, a senior at Fraser High School, and Emily, who's a senior at Royal Oak High School.
Fill us in on what things have been like for you for the past 7 weeks, and you are all virtual.
We're using this program called Canvas. So that's how the teacher-student communication has been going. No one turns on their cameras in my classes either. Like, there is a couple where I don't think I've heard anyone speak like in the entire time that we've been in school so far. It's just really weird.
Isaac, fill us in on what's happening at Cass Tech. You're a sophomore and you guys are all virtual as well.
It's been difficult because in my geometry class, we get in these groups, and my group doesn't talk at all. And I know I need help with geometry, because usually in math it's been a struggle for all the other classes too. But for some of my classes, we're talking more in each class by the day. So that's good.
So, but it's taking a while. I mean, if we've been back in school for 7 weeks and it's just kind of getting to the point where students, you guys are feeling more comfortable communicating this way, or communicating in the breakout rooms.
Well, for example, when we need help with something in like one of the Zoom meetings, everybody has to listen to your question being asked, and everybody has to listen to the teacher going through that with that student. And so it's like, when we're supposed to be off doing our own thing and we hear those questions being answered, it's a little bit distracting. When we're in school, we can privately go up to the teacher, get our questions asked, like, you know, and not interrupting the whole class. But now I just feel kind of like a burden to the class when I ask questions.
Yeah. So do you think, Emily, that it might stop people from actually asking a question, saying, well, I'll just figure out on my own, or I'm hesitant to even look like the dumb person who's raising their hand who needs the help?
Absolutely. I mean, I do that. Like, I kind of feel the pressure to like not ask anything and just to kind of figure it out on my own.
Hey, Isaac, when you guys get off of Zoom and you finish your school day, what are you and your friends talking about? What are the biggest problems, do you think, that students that you guys are encountering that maybe no one's listening to?
We're on screens for 8 hours a day, and then 55 minutes for each class. And that's what we usually talk about, because class time is way too long for us, and it's hard to focus all the 55 minutes. I think our schedule needs to be changed, because I don't think I can focus the whole year.
I mean, I can't be on a work Zoom meeting longer than 45 minutes before my mind starts to wander. So I can't imagine that repetitive, like you've ended one class and then you just got to get right back on. Mackenzie, what are your friends telling you?
They're actually saying a lot of the same things that Isaac's friends are saying, which is that each class, it just seems too long.
Emily, is it the same thing with you and your friends?
It's pretty similar. The only difference is that like our classes are kind of like sectioned in half. So like we have half the class is a live meeting and then half the class is like working on your own. But it's still grueling.
All right, now you guys are the student reporters for the PBS NewsHour Student Reporting Lab. What are some of the stories that you'd like to tell that you don't think are out there?
First, I'm gonna go with sports, because I'm on Cavs basketball team right now. Mm-hmm. And something else is the Black Lives Matter movement, because of my race, and I want to support.
Emily, what about you? What are some of the stories that you're interested in telling?
How like teachers are becoming a lot more casual between student communication, and I think that's actually like a good thing, because like you don't feel like it's your teacher's just this like super like high superior being that you feel like you can't like talk to. So I think just like the online communication is really helping with that.
We will continue to check in with our student reporters as they give us perspective on what's happening inside schools and how that's affecting their learning. All right, before we go, this week opens a unique performance run for the Michigan Opera Theater in the venue's parking garage. Here's MOT's new and acclaimed artistic director, Yuval Sharon.
It is taking opera into kind of an unusual space, not in the normal operatic, the opera house that people are used to. And the Detroit Opera House is a beautiful theater, but because of the pandemic, we're not allowed to gather there and to hear opera, to see opera perform on the stage. So it feels like a very fitting introduction for me to Detroit to present an opera in maybe a more unusual setting, a more everyday setting, namely the Detroit Opera House Parking Center, which is across the street from the Opera House and belongs to the opera. So it feels like a potential for it to be considered a second opera house, in some ways. And what we're doing is doing a performance there that is for groups of 8 cars at a time. And they move through the parking center and move from level to level in that parking center. On each level of the parking center is a scene from Wagner's opera Twilight of the Gods. And so it culminates, it's, normally the opera is 6 hours. We have an abbreviated version of 60 minutes, and the audience hears all of it on their FM radio, partially because of the safety, to make sure our audience and our artists are safe, but also because it is a very cool experience to be having the sound of FM radio be this transmission device for this live performance.
Performances are the 17th, 18th, and 20th, and really brings in a new era of performance to the Michigan Opera Theater. Just head to our website for more info, onedetroitpbs.org. And that's going to do it for me. I'll see you next week for One Detroit. Take care.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.
From Delta faucets to Behr paint, MASCO Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. MASCO, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Support for this program provided by the Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV,
the KRESGE Foundation, Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan.
The DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public TV, among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving. We support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Visit dtefoundation.com to learn more.
Business Leaders for Michigan, dedicated to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. NISSAN Foundation, Ally, and viewers like you.